This is Legislative Review on Prairie Public. I'm Dave Thompson. Thanks for joining us today. Our guest on the program is Democratic Senator Joan Heckeman. She's from New Rockford and is the assistant leader in the Senate for the Democrats. Senator, thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for asking me today. I'm proud to be here and represent my caucus today.
We had you on the program 2 years ago, so each legislative session seems to have a theme or some kind of direction. What's your thoughts about the 2015 legislative session?
Well, I think this session has been a little calmer than other sessions. We have some themes on education, of course, is a big priority, and coming into the session, making sure that we had adequate funding out in the West with the surge bill that came early on in the session. And then there are a number of tax bills that are still available right now for our voting, and conference committees are in full swing right now. So the session is going along as usual, but with just a little different twist in the kinds of bills that we had this session.
And I'm guessing one of the twists could be the fact that the oil prices have been a major concern since day one.
Well, they have, and when we got the forecast in March, it made a lot of difference in what our funding was for, especially the agency bills. I'm sitting on appropriations this year, and it's my first session on appropriations, so besides learning all the language and the issues, I'm learning how to work with the funds that we have available to provide what we need for the agencies.
I'm glad you brought that up. I've been dying to ask this question. What's more fun, appropriations or policy?
I liked both. I did like policy because I had the opportunity 2 sessions to sit on human services, and I had a great chairman there, Senator Judy Lee out of Fargo, and she taught me a lot, but she was a great chairman, and I enjoyed that. Then the last 2 sessions I served on education with Leighton Freeburg as my chairman and Senator Flackel, and they both were also great leaders, and I really enjoyed that. But policy is important, but I like appropriations this year a lot better.
Are you good with numbers?
Well, I hope I am. I was a math teacher all my life, so statistics and math are something I can work with all day long. And while we do work with numbers a lot, there's some other issues that go in making sure that programs have the adequate funding.
Since you were on appropriations, there was a lot of talk when the forecast first came out about contingency plans, contingency budgeting. In Senate appropriations, have you been doing a lot of that?
We haven't done a lot. There have been a couple of budgets where we put some contingency funds in, and I don't know how they're coming through the conference committees right now. But we're looking at, when I met this afternoon just before I came, we met on a conference committee, and that conference committee is looking at maybe some targeted equity funding for salaries for some of the agencies. And so that was brought up by one of the Senate appropriations leaders. So we're looking probably at that. My caucus stood really strong on contingencies, and we may still look at something in the OMB budget before session is over.
I've been hearing that. You brought up the OMB budget, and what I've been talking to some people in leadership saying that may be the place to put contingencies on.
I think so too, and maybe some of the other opportunities in there for looking at some of the programs that we've cut. It's hard to say how you want to design contingencies, whether you want to design them for salaries or for programming or for capital building improvements. So we'll be looking at that as we go into the last few weeks here.
You mentioned buildings. That's one of the big sticking points now between the House and Senate.
It certainly has been. We've added a few of those buildings back in, and as the conference committees complete their work, I expect there may be some more issues with that. I know the governor's mansion was a big issue, and I actually supported that with the issue of whether it's easier to build new or to remodel old. And so that was one that I understand right now is coming out of conference committee with supporting to go ahead with that.
Now, we probably should mention that in the governor's mansion situation, the money is there.
Actually, it is. The money is there in a fund already. It could be used on a few other things on the Capitol grounds, but since the money is there, it doesn't come out of the general fund, and it doesn't come out of any of the other important funds that we use for funding agency budgets.
If you had your druthers on contingencies, what would be your top 3 or 4 priorities?
Well, right now, I think we need to provide some contingency funding for targeted equity for some of the state employees that are in the bottom 25% of employees in the state. We have a few agencies that have very low salaries for workers that have been there for 25 years, and I think that that's important. I also think it's important to put some contingency money in for the behavioral health issues that have been so talked about all during the interim and have sort of gotten ignored during the session a little bit.
That was a big consultant's report talking about behavioral health, if I remember correctly.
It was. The Schulte report came out over the interim, and although my interim committees didn't focus on that, the committees that did came forward with a number of bills and a number of amendments to the human services and health budgets.
Do you think it was ignored basically because people are pointing to oil prices and saying money may not be here?
I don't know if it's that much as probably lack of education towards the public and the legislature on the importance of these issues across the state of North Dakota. I think mental health has gotten a bad rap as something that you can't cure and you can't help, but we certainly know that that's not true, and we know the services need to be there for the people.
There seemed to be, at least from the majority leader in the Senate, a lot of sympathy, if you want to put it that way, toward that position. He'd like to have seen something done with behavioral health as well. And then, of course, the session goes on, other issues start coming up, priorities are set, and maybe this wasn't on a priority list.
It may not have been, but I think that there's still opportunities out there. You know, we're sitting with a big personal and corporate income tax bill in the House that has enough money to cover these programs adequately going into the next biennium. And if we would put that tax bill aside, we would have plenty of money.
Yeah, the Senate did defeat a tax bill. Basically, the appropriations chairman said that they can use the money other places, but there is that bill that's still hanging around the House.
Yes, there is. It's still over there. I think it has about $125 million of personal and corporate income tax relief, and we are hearing nothing from the public on income tax relief for the personal income tax, and the corporations are coming to the state because of the economic conditions right now. They know that this is the place to be to start a business rather than looking for a tax break.
And North Dakota has a workforce.
Absolutely, yeah. We do have some workforce issues right now in some areas. I think across the state we could use more workers in a lot of areas, but some of those people from the western area might fill in some of those positions now.
I have to ask you about early childhood, because something did pass out of the legislature this time at $3 million to provide some grants for pre-K education. You were on that bill.
I was. Senate Bill 2151 passed this morning out of the Senate. We're pleased that it has $3 million in it. It started out as $6 million, and it would have provided slots for about 6,000 4-year-olds across the state of North Dakota. And it came out of the study that was done over the interim by the Department of Public Instruction and some stakeholders. One of the sticking points last session where we couldn't come forward with a pre-K funding bill was the issue of having the daycare providers or the child care providers not on the same page. And so the department did a task force over the interim, and this was the recommendation that came forth. Tie it into a community grant where the daycare providers or child care providers can work with the school and with the staff of trained educators and provide some services in the local communities. And the bill that came out this morning has $3 million in it, and it's basically for low and low-income families. And so I really supported that change.
Is $3 million enough?
Well, certainly not. It's not enough. If we look at over 10,000 4-year-olds across the state of North Dakota, we're not going to cover them right now. There are about 70 schools that already have pre-K programs, and they're doing it on their own dime right now. They're using either some local funds or raising funds somehow, or using some of their property tax money that they raise locally to provide those services. And there's nothing but good news from those programs.
Is this maybe the first baby step in what might be a process to do more and more with pre-K?
Well, we're hoping so. You know, you get the negative conversation across both aisles that we're just starting a new program and this is going to cost us more. I think the investment at this age is an important investment for the future of our state of North Dakota. Putting money here at a young age is better than putting it into corrections or mental health issues later on.
Were there anything else that that's on your plate right now that you're really closely watching as we get into this third period of the hockey game, so to speak?
Well, we're still looking at some issues with property tax relief and making sure that we have that out there for the people of North Dakota. We've done a number of issues with women's health, and those are coming forward right now onto the floor out of conference committee, and we're pleased with some of the issues for families that are coming forward. I would have to say, looking at the end of the session here, the education bill, the human services budget, and corrections are some big, and transportation are some big bills that have issues in them that aren't resolved right now, and I can't really speak to how the resolution is going to come forward.
But Human Services is a huge budget. It covers an awful lot of territory, and there are some significant differences between the House and Senate.
There certainly are, and I think that not only in the areas of behavioral and mental health, but it's in current programming. The Medicaid expansion last session was important to the state of North Dakota for getting more families and more individuals on some kind of a preventative health program rather than running to the emergency room, as some of them have had to do when they haven't had health care. And so that's been really important to the state of North Dakota. It does cost money, but some of that's federal funding. And we know that in order to keep our state healthy and our people working, we have to have that kind of a service.
So the idea is that there probably are needs that are not being met.
There certainly are. There's always needs out there in the state that aren't being met, and we're trying to do that. And sitting on the conference committee on that budget is a overwhelming task right now. It's not one that I'm on, and I'm glad in my first year in appropriations that I'm not on that budget.
Yet you served on Human Services before, so it might be a good fit.
Well, it might have been. You know, I'm really pleased with the budgets that I've been assigned to by the appropriations chairman, and they've been a good fit. I just finished working on career and technical education before I came here today, and that's important to me because I think career and technical education are where a lot of our jobs are in our state right now. And my experience in education, I know that not everybody needs a four-year degree in the state of North Dakota. We certainly want to continue encouraging those students to go for four-year degrees that want to have a career in that area. But there are so many jobs out there where a two-year degree is important right now.
Talking about the interconnectivity with the property tax relief, you've got the budget for schools, the K-12 funding budget, and there are differences between the House and Senate on that one as well.
Well, there certainly are. There always are. I think they're working them out in conference committee right now, and sometimes when I get done with my conference committees, I try to sit in on some others, and I haven't had the opportunity to sit in. I know one of the issues is the change in per pupil payments right now. The House dropped what the Senate had. The Senate had about a 3% increase. The House went down to about a 2% increase, and that certainly was a difference there. I think there's an issue on what the local property tax mill levy should be. There's still always issues concerning transportation. Had money cut this year from the House. So I know that they're actually, when I left, they were just going into conference committee again today. So. And
this is also not a partisan issue because there are people on both sides of the aisle.
Absolutely, it's a philosophy on where you think that the money should be placed for the betterment of the state of North Dakota, and that's what the conference committee is working out right now. Sometimes you put in a little buffer in there when you pass the bill in your chamber so you have some talking points, but I wouldn't say that the education bill is one of those that has any, that the Senate did an excellent job on bringing a bill forward towards the House.
And not to put too fine a point on it, education is something everybody supports.
Absolutely. And you know, when we look at K through 12 education, there's been a greater emphasis on preparing students for college, whether it is a 2-year or 4-year degree, and that's where we want our money to go into those areas.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about higher education, which is going to a conference committee too, and there are significant differences between the House and Senate again.
Well, there has been. I think one of the big differences that the Senate put in the bill was a cap on tuition at 2.5%. I supported that just in the degree that we already heard from one campus that they're looking at a large increase in tuition, and that probably that news report came out at a opportune time for the university system budget to look at that and put that in. They're looking at capital improvements, some buildings. We did some things with Dickinson State on a contingency plan. We did some things for Dickinson State on a bonding. So, there's issues out there. All the small campuses have issues, and the large ones do. And if we don't take care of our buildings out there, which was basically out the first half of the session, all buildings were dropped, and now we're looking at putting some of those building plans back in.
You've got buildings, plus you have deferred maintenance.
We
on
do, and
existings.
yep. And I think that's one of the big issues. If you don't take care of deferred maintenance, you're going to have issues further on down the line that cost more.
You voted for it in committee?
Yes.
This Senate version of the bill.
Yes.
And of course, that gets it into conference. And Senator Holmberg, who chairs the committee, said it was like a Goldilocks choice. And you basically split down the middle. It's still about a 9% increase.
Well, it's significant. It varies from campus to campus. On the funding formula that was started 2 years ago, the campuses haven't had a complete biennium to look at how that affects their overall budget in their campuses. And there was thought early on in the House to change that funding formula. But the campuses wanted an opportunity to try it, and it's based on credits completed by the students. And I think that that's a really important way to go, so that we get our students on track and get them out in 4 years if they can. But it's also important for the campuses, because that shows that they have the staff necessary to complete these programs.
Are you happy with the way higher education's been going? And the reason I ask that is there was some controversy over a couple of the board appointments that the governor wanted to make, and one person resigned, and the Senate has the advise and consent role on it. So I'm just curious where you come down on the Board of Higher Education.
Well, I have to admire the Board of Higher Education, because they've been in the news significantly over the last 4 years or even 6 years since I've been serving. I think that they have a very difficult job, because they have campuses that they need to supervise and that they're in charge of. And I don't know that as legislators we should be sticking our nose as far into their business as we are. I think that if we give the board the opportunity to do their job and the chancellor to do his or her job, I think that we will have a good system. Our students have always been coming out with good degrees out of the state of North Dakota. It hasn't affected our students' education at all. It's more the opportunities of legislators feel they need to have more control, and I disagree with that.
Well, I will ask, it's not necessarily a control question, but the Board of Higher Education is looking for a new chancellor. What would you hope to see in a new higher education chancellor?
Well, I think we need someone to take this board and direct it into what it originally started out with, to take leadership opportunities and take it to all the campuses. There was, I think, a little bit of a problem with some of the presidents on the campuses feeling they had a little bit more control than they did. And that's why we have the chancellor and the board, is to take control over, do policy, and get that policy out to our campuses, and then let the presidents run their individual campuses more in a manner like they can. And they have staff there that they need to take care of too. So the presidents on each college campus have a big job. But the board is to develop the policy to make our 11 campuses run efficiently and effectively.
Since the roundtable, there seems to have been some in the legislature, I'll put it this way, who didn't like what the roundtable came up with. The roundtable saying, okay, higher education, you're left to do what you need to do, but you have to, show us that you've been doing what you've been doing. And a lot of people say that gave the Board of Higher Education and the campuses too much authority over what they do. And maybe the legislature has to take some of that authority back. You're seeing the same kind of thing, that there might be a group in the legislature that's saying we should have more control?
I think that this session is probably less than I've seen before in the past. The chancellor, the interim chancellor, has done, I think, a good job in connecting with the legislator and communicating the needs out there. There certainly have been issues, but if you take any department, you take any corporation or company across the state of North Dakota, there are always issues that come up. I don't think it's any different than any other. It's just more of a public, they have a public presence. And I'm just looking forward to the new board members that have been confirmed by the Senate to do what they need to do to get this back into shape.
I'd like to go back to something about the West and it actually affects most of North Dakota. And that was the idea to change the formula for that oil tax distribution. And the agreement is 70-30, 70% state, 30% local. There was a push to do it 60-40, 60% local, 40% state. Basically, they gave up the fight after the funding for, or the new revenue forecast. How did you feel about a 60-40 split?
Well, coming into the session, I think it was very good. A 60-40 split was what the western counties and cities said they needed to complete the infrastructure and get their places back in order and get ready to complete the oil boom as it's coming through the state of North Dakota. When we did a tour out there this summer, that's what we heard, is that 60 would be what we would need. Some of them were not even asking for money. They were just asking for the opportunity to be able to access part of the money that they gave back to the state. And I supported that coming into the session. After we got into the March revenue forecast, that had to change a little bit. Our caucus was pretty strong, and we still feel pretty strong about the fact that if we would put a contingency in there, that if there's so many barrels of oil pumped per day, and we could have designed that in some other ways. The price of oil, we tried to design it a number of different ways so that 40% of that could go back to the local political subdivisions. And we weren't successful in doing that, but the session's not over yet, remember, and we still support giving more of that tax back to the locals out west.
All right, then an overall question, since you did mention the session's not over yet, and we've got, literally you can go 80 days, but I know leadership wants to have 5 days in reserve in case you have to come back to adjust budgets again. There are still a lot of moving parts at this point. How close do you think we are to getting some final, shall we say, agreements to get the session moving?
Well, since I'm not in the majority, I probably know less than some of the other people do. So I go along with moving parts right now, and we're trying to adjust to some of the changes as the conference committee reports come out. But there have been a couple of budgets that haven't even gone into conference committees yet that are important to the state of North Dakota. OMB is one, public education is another one. We're just getting that appointed now. And as those parts move, I think we'll come out with a good product for the state of North Dakota. We always do. It's just where your druthers are. Would you rather have more money in one spot than the other? And that's always, with the number of legislators we can't always agree on that 100%.
The keys, I think, this is from my perspective, just watching this, it seems to me the keys are going to be the OMB bill and higher education and K-12. Would that be fair, or do you think there's still more fight over the oil tax distribution fund?
Well, I think those are all fair fair statements that you made there. I also think that the Water Commission budget is a huge budget right now. There's some issues out there because their funding comes in through the Resources Trust Fund, and if the price of oil stays down, that will have a significant negative impact on all of the water issues that are out across the state. Human Services budget, I'm still going to come back to that as an issue because we really need to get more money into mental health and behavioral health services across the state. We've worked the last session to get some great services for autism across the state of North Dakota, and those are being expanded a little bit. We really, I sit on a couple of coalitions for autism, and we really supported the governor's budget in that manner. And hopefully, those issues are important to the state of North Dakota, to the families out there. And we need to work to get funding into those areas.
And there's one other thing that's still kind of hanging over everything, and that is the expectation is that this big trigger tax break on oil is going to kick in June 1. But there's still a couple months left before June 1st, and who knows what might happen with the situation in the Middle East and with OPEC. So I suppose everybody's kind of watching that very carefully too.
Well, we certainly are. Everyone was excited when we looked at the oil prices yesterday and today. They were more optimistic than they have been in the past. And, I think that there will be certainly both sides of the chamber are looking out for the interests in the state of North Dakota. And I believe that there will be a bipartisan effort to do some contingencies if we get to that point in the session where we're still unsure whether the price or the trigger will go on or stay off.
So there will be more contingencies, you believe.
I'm hoping, yeah, our caucus is really hoping so, because when we only meet every 2 years, it's very difficult when that trigger could go off or could come on, and not knowing that, we're hoping to save some days, but at this point, I'm not sure that that's going to happen, is to save as many days as we want.
I know the idea was 5, but there's still, as we said, moving parts, and to get those all settled and to get out, and just the mechanics of getting out might be a bit of a challenge.
It could be, and we always end up with something at the end that's a sticking point between the two chambers. You know, it's just the way the legislature moves. You know, we're trying to work together, and I think there's been some great progress in a lot of conference committees already that are probably ready to finish up a lot of their work.
Senator, I appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much.
Our guest today on Legislative Review, Senator Joan Heckman from New Rockford, North Dakota. She's the Assistant Democratic Leader in the state Senate and a member of Appropriations. For Prairie Public, I'm Dave Thompson.